morning, everyone. How are you today? Wow, you are so welcome to today's episode of Brief to Grace. I am your host, Ruth Hephzibah. And today I am so excited to have you in this house today. So, how are you doing? How is your day? It's just a very beautiful day. I love the weather. I love everything that is happening right now. And I think I'm beginning to love this fall, right? It's not really like so cold where I am. It's just awesome. And I think I'm beginning to fall in love with it. Like, really fall in love with it. So, you're welcome to today's episode. And today we have a title which is When Medicine Fails, Grieving the Loss of a Loved One Due to Medical Tragedy. So, that is exactly what we're talking about today. And as usual, I'm always going to ask you how you're doing. How you're doing this morning, how you're doing um this whole season, and I'm so excited too because it's a new month and this is November. We are here again to say whoo, the year is coming to an end and is getting into the holiday season. And I love holiday. I love holiday. I don't know about you, but I do. So you're welcome once again to Grief to Grace, the podcast dedicated to guiding you from the depth of sorrow to the heights of healing. And I am your host, Ruth Hephzibah, a fresh start coach committed to helping you transform your pain into purpose. So, what do we do here? Through our podcast, we employ all of your stories of resilience, offering support and hope to those navigating the challenges and the path of grief. And this season is usually a very difficult one for most people. It's a difficult one for those people who are navigating grief in whatever form. Sometimes we're navigating grief and we are stuck in the grief. We are there living with the grief. Some people are navigating grief because it just happened. Some people are there because it's still happening even in their life and they don't know how to get out of it. So today we have a guest in the house who is experienced and will be talking to us about her story. And that story is something that really resonates so much with me because I've had a lot of stories of people who have had problems because they of some medical reactions or maybe some fake drugs or just a lot. And they but what is really bad about it is when someone have to die from such reactions. And I know that was on Saturday. I had a story of a lady who was giving her own story on how um a child died from fake drugs and just so much somewhere in Africa, and the authorities were trying to cover up and all that. Just so much happened. But what pained me most then was that life was involved, and the child died. The parents were grieving. The person that was trying to make sure it doesn't happen, that was almost sacked and all that, and how his family went through a lot of grief and just a lot. And to know that sometimes people don't even understand how much people go through when these things happen, especially medical reactions. I remember also when my husband was ill, and he was given a medication that quickened his passing, and because he reacted so adversely to that medication, and at the end of it all, what happened? He passed also. Maybe if things were done differently, maybe he would have lived longer or he would have been alive. Who knows? So today we have our guest in the house who is going to be talking to us and sharing her own story of how a daughter passed 18 years ago due to reaction to some antibiotic that was administered to her. And, you know, she also faced the pain of abusive marriage affected by pornography addiction, and also her journey is one of immense sorrow and also incredible strength and recovery. You know, just so much happened in the midst of all this. She had to go through all this, but for the, we will come back and talk much about the abusive marriage, especially when it has to do with sexual abuse, because a lot of people are going through that, and that's going to be a new episode again, and on its own, and it's going to be happening on the 8th of this month, November. So just stay tuned and be there to listen to that part of her story as she shares that journey. But today she'll be sharing her story on how her daughter passed from drug reactions. But before we delve into all of that, and bring our guest on to you, I would like to share with you um, my book. But before I do that, I'm going to take you through our journey. Through our journey. So we of which we've been through, like go through what we stand for in this Grief to Grace International. We have a lot just happening and a lot we're trying to do and a lot we're doing. And all we need is your support. And we need your support, especially when you get our book, A Pen That Rewrites Grief. You will be able to help us in our journey. So, this book that you see here is that book that helps us in our journey. It can is a guide, is a healing guide that can help you navigate your grief. It has a lot of interventions that you can use as you navigate grief. So every day of it has its own interventions. And like I always say here, there are days you don't want to stand up, there are days you don't want to do nothing, but this book will help you even in those days. So it's actually that book I used is during those interventions I used during my journey. And I still use them. I still give them out. My kids still use them. Friends still use them. Clients still use them. Everyone still use them. And it is a reflection of my own journey through loss and offering insights and guidance on how you can navigate grief and find grace even in your journey. So it is a resource that everyone needs. As long as you want a fresh start in life, you may not have lost somebody, but maybe you're stuck in any way. So when you're stuck and you need to move, this book is one book that you need as you begin to rewrite your narrative and embrace a fresh start in life. So also, um, we have a lot going on right now, and we will also encourage you to help support this project which I'm introducing. I want you to join in this project, in this campaign, and it is Be the Light, Adopt a Grieving Family project. So I have shared my story in some of episodes before, how I was helped, and I don't hesitate always to talk about it, how I got help and how people keep helping, especially in the time of grief. And those little support kept me and my family, me and my boys going. Imagine losing your husband and leaving you with four boys, little kids, with no job, with nothing, and you had to depend on people. So if there were nobody to adopt us as a family, if there were nobody to help, how would we have survived? So this project means so much to me because I've benefited a lot from projects like this in the past, and I'm extending it to you. If this is holiday season, are you trying to help somebody? Are you trying to give out back to the society? We have a lot of um people out there that need this help. So we have this project, Be the Light, Adopt a Grieving Family. It is very key. It is something that you will be so happy that you participated in. I don't know how you want to support, but there are just so many ways to support in this project. So it is not so difficult, it is not so expensive. There are just a lot of ways, and I will be sharing the QR code shortly so that if you want to participate in this project, you will uh, be opportuned. When I share the QR code, please just click on it and you will be able, or you go to our website, Grief to Grace international.org, and you will be able to support in this project. So please, I really appreciate all that you're doing, and I know that you are here to help, and you've been doing a lot of very great job supporting this podcast by getting our book all the time and also supporting in your own little way. So please don't hesitate to join us in this project. Be their light, adopt a grieving family. So, if you want to know how you can adopt a grieving family for life, or you want to adopt a grieving family for a year, you want to adopt a grieving family for the season, you want to adopt a grieving family for just a little short while, or you want to be a monthly contributor to a grieving family, don't hesitate to reach out to us on grief to grace now@gmail.com, or you send me a DM, or you can reach me on through text message or WhatsApp on my phone number 346 2428041. So we are here to help you. So before I bring my guest up to you, I want you to know that I love you, and from the bottom of my heart, I love you. So shortly now, I will be bringing up my guest after this interlude. So you are welcome once again to this beautiful podcast. I know that you always there, always staying put with us here at Grief to Grace. And now I have my guest in the house. And like I said during the introduction, she is Beth Brunk. And I hope I got that right, Beth.
Yep, Beth Brunk. That is correct.
Okay, so she is a certified professional life coach and a certified transformational nutrition coach, helping women reclaim their inner safety after betrayal so they can strive and blossom again. So now, this lady you see here, Beth, is a believer of God, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and she sees his hand in everything around her life, and she sees God in her life experiences, giving him all the glory, praises, and honor for her healing. So Beth has faced a lot of grief. She faced grief from the death of her marriage to her former husband, as she struggled with pornography addiction and was abusive to her. And also, she faced grief from the death of her daughter, who passed 18 years ago. And in all of this, she was grieving. And today, she's here to share her story on how she was able to navigate grief and become the woman that she is today. So, and do you know what? She'll be coming back next week to share her story on how she was able to navigate and heal from the trauma from her former husband. So, Beth, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Ruth.
Wow, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm super excited to have you in the house today. So today we have a lot to talk about, especially um, when it comes to medications and the debts that came with it. A lot of people go through that and they live all their life in regrets. Maybe they would have been able to do something different. If only I've not allowed them. If only she has not taken it. If only, just so much keeps happening. And you keep grieving. And I know there are a lot of people, like I shared my story just shortly before now on about my husband. Sometimes I just lay there and like, oh, maybe that day they gave him that medication. If only I didn't allow them, maybe he would have not reacted negatively to it, and maybe he would have been able, if they had done something different, if I had also known what to do at that time, maybe I would have been able to do something different. So just so much happens. So I just want to say thank you for all that you're doing. And before I she talks to us about her story, I just want to ask, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Okay, so before she talks about to us about her story, I would just want to encourage your listeners to reflect on your own experiences, and if you have any experienced any loss, or you face similar loss or something, or you want to share your own story, you can share it on Grief to Grace, like Beth is doing, and just send a message to us on Grief to Grace now at gmail.com. So the next voice you'll definitely be hearing after now is the voice of Beth, and she will be sharing her story with us. And by the time we come back again, we'll be maybe asking some questions on some of the things we've heard from her. And also stay tuned to the end because we will be sharing the three nuggets as usual that I got from all of her stories. And we'll also be giving you some of our Bible verses and quotes, which people love so much. So I'm definitely going to share all that with you. So don't forget to stay tuned. And right now, you can click on the like button and the subscribe button and share this episode with your friends and your family. Get them together. Tell them Beth is talking, and we have Grief to Grace, and we want you to listen. Have a great day as we listen to Beth. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you. So, I have 5 children. The oldest is 23, and the second one will be 21. She would be because she died in September of 2006. Um, she was born in September of 2003, and she was 27 days from being 3 years old when she died from a reaction to antibiotics. She presented with an ear infection in late October of 2005, and I took her to the doctor, and they prescribed amoxicillin for the ear infection. Um, Gave her the amoxicillin, took her back in for the recheck to make sure that the infection was gone, and it was gone in one ear, but now it was in the other ear, and so she was on another round of antibiotics. And it was after that second round of antibiotics that I started to notice she would walk funny. Some days she would walk fine, some days she didn't want to walk at all. And so I took her back in and said, just something's going on here. And the doctor was like, she looks fine to me. And this continued all through November and December of 2005. And in November, or I'm sorry, excuse me, in December, she the ear infections just would not go away with the antibiotics. And so they decided the best thing would be to give her a shot that they assured me just always takes care of the ear infection. So that's what we did. Now, I had never been a mother that would just run to the doctor for anything and everything. Um, so this was not something that was typical in my family. When we gave her the shot, it did clear up the ear infections for a little bit. But then in January of 2006, she crawled out of bed one morning, she collapsed, and she would not walk. She wouldn't get up. She just cried. So we took her in and told them what was going on. They did x-rays and they said, well, if she's still not walking by in 2 days' time, bring her back and we'll send you to Children's Hospital for some testing. Well, guess what? She wasn't walking in 2 days' time. And so we ended up going over to Children's Hospital. Now, what I've left out so far is that I was pregnant with my third child, and now I am 7 months pregnant. Going over to Children's Hospital, I live in Washington, and I have to cross a mountain pass. If you're familiar with Washington and I-90, I have to cross the Snoqualmie Pass to get to the hospital. And this is wintertime, so you never know what the pass is going to be like, if it's going to be clear, if it's going to be snowy, if it's going to get shut down. Well, I was naive. I did not know. I expected to go over, have the testing done, and be home the very same day. That's not what happened. We went over and we did not come home for 4 weeks.
Hmm.
So in that 4 weeks that we were admitted into the hospital, and they did a bone scan, and there was some areas in her bones that lit up. That's what they called it. They lit up on the scan, and they showed that to us, and they said, we don't know what this is. And the questions began. Does she drink well water? Has the well water been tested? All kinds of, is there any way that she would have gotten an infection and that could have gotten in her bones? All kinds of questions. And our answers were always the same. We got asked these questions over and over and over and over, and we always had the same answers. No, the well water's fine. No, she's not had any scratches. No, the only thing that's been different has been the antibiotics. Well, that wasn't the answer that they wanted. And they finally decided that she had osteomyelitis, bone inflammation, not infection. And so they put her on NSAIDs. And excuse me, an NSAID is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, and it is typically a prescription. Now, ibuprofen qualifies as an NSAID, but it is over the counter. So this was a prescription NSAID, and she reacted. Before we left the hospital, I noticed that the corners of her eyes were kind of puffy. And so again, I mentioned it to the doctors at the hospital, and her eyes look fine to them. If you've picked up on this theme, there's this little theme that's running throughout this. The doctors never notice what I notice as her mother. I'm dismissed. As her mother, I'm dismissed that, no, there's nothing wrong with your child. Instead of saying, this person knows her child better than we do, let's look at this a little bit closer. So I was dismissed. Well, we came home, and we were home for a couple of weeks, and she started to have, when she would cry, there would be blood in her tears. And her eyes, the corners of her eyes, it just kept being puffy, and it just kept getting worse. And so I took her to her doctor here in town, and I said, this is what's going on. And she looked at her and she said, I have no idea what this is. And I was like, well, we need to figure this out, because this is her eyes. This is her sight. I don't want something affecting my child's sight at 2 years old when she's got the rest of her life before her. So I said, I want a referral to Children's Hospital because I want to find out what's going on. Well, in the meantime, before I got that referral to Children's, in the meantime, her nose started to bleed, and there would just be blood coming out of her nose. And I was like, okay, so now it's eyes, now it's nose, and I had a baby. In all of this, I had a baby. We welcomed our first son, and I was going to the doctor 3 and 4 times a week with a newborn. But I wasn't going to the doctor for the newborn. I was going to the doctor for his 2-year-old sister. I get the referral for Children's. I call Children's, and I ask for an appointment, and they said, well, we don't have any appointments for 6 months. And I said, I can't wait 6 months. is there anyone in the Seattle area that is a pediatric a pediatric eye doctor that can take a look at her and give me an idea? And so they gave me some names, started calling like the fourth or fifth one. I called, said, yeah, we can get you in on Tuesday. And I said, I will be there. Loaded up my children, took them to this doctor. He took one look at her and he said, this looks like Stevens-Johnson syndrome. And I said, what's Stevens-Johnson syndrome? And he said, well, it's a reaction to antibiotics. And I said, are you serious? And he said, yes. He said, there's someone here in Seattle that specializes in it. Because you're from so far away, I'm going to get you in with him today. I'm going to see about getting you in with him today. And he can give you an idea of what needs to be done. You can imagine the thoughts that I'm having, the reaction that I'm having internally, because I've said all along, this is all related to the antibiotics, and no one will listen to me. When she presented with the not wanting to walk, I said, the only thing that's changed is the antibiotics. No, antibiotics wouldn't do this. When she presented with the eyes at Children's Hospital, antibiotics is the only things that's changed. Now she's been put on NSAIDs. So I actually took her off of the NSAIDs myself. I quit giving them to her in March. In April, we went to see this doctor that I just mentioned that diagnosed her with the SJS. We did go see the specialist that very same day, and he looked at her and he said, yes, this is Stevens-Johnson syndrome. I'm currently treating a 7-year-old boy who looks very similar to her, and we've taken him off of everything, and we're making great progress. And I'm like, great. Okay, this is like some hope. Well, what I didn't know was everything that was going on internally. But before I get too far ahead of my story here, in April, she quit eating. One day she put a bite in her mouth and she screamed and she spit it out and she refused to put anything more in her mouth and she refused to eat. And she was also very small. She actually had been diagnosed with Turner syndrome, which there's no connection between the Turner syndrome and her death. I just want to be very clear on that. A lot of people think she died from Turner syndrome. She didn't die from Turner syndrome. She died from the reaction to the antibiotics. A lot of women have Turner syndrome and they live full, active, productive, fulfilling lives. They don't die from the Turner syndrome. So anyway, she quit eating and I took her to the doctor here in town and I said, something needs to be done. She only weighs 18 pounds. She's 2 years old. She only weighs 18 pounds. Can we do a feeding tube? And she said, well, we won't do a feeding tube until she loses at least 2 pounds. And I'm like, are you kidding me? This is not okay. My child's not eating. She's clearly very sick. And you're telling me she has to lose weight before you'll do anything like a feeding tube to help her? So when we came home from the hospital in February, there was a doctor that Children's is a teaching hospital, and this doctor had called me in March and said, I hope you've had your baby. I just wanted to call and check in and see. She was a doctor that was doing rounds. She was doing her internship there at Children's. I just wanted to follow up and see how things are going since you went home. Here's my pager number. Page me if I can ever do anything to help you. I had kept that pager number and I called that doctor and I told her everything that had happened since we had went home in February. And she said, let me talk to the hospital administration and see what we can do. So she talked to them and she called me back and she said, we will do a feeding tube. Here's the date that we'll do it. It ended up being in June. And so we're now to May. I'm not keeping you up on my dates very well here, but we're now to May. In May, I scheduled her for a sleep study because she wasn't sleeping good. And she was walking across our yard one day and she fell and her knee landed on a rock and it fractured her knee. So now she's in a cast. She can't walk. She's stuck on the couch. And through it all, she was happy. She was She laughed and she told jokes and she had fun. She made life fun. But now she's stuck on the couch. She still has the eye thing going on. She still has the nose thing going on. And I had her scheduled for the sleep study because she wasn't sleeping very well, because now in hindsight, I've learned that she actually couldn't breathe through her nose. Well, children are still breathing through their nose at 2 years old. They don't breathe through their mouth very much yet. And so it was a struggle to sleep if you can't breathe through your nose. We all know what that's like with the stuffy nose, right? So it's a struggle. She can't breathe. And so I've had the sleep study set up. Well, her breathing got better. She started sleeping better, so I canceled it. We always see things in 2020 hindsight, right? If I had kept that sleep study appointment, we probably would have found out a lot of things a lot quicker. But I canceled it because, again, I have a 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and now a 2-month-old baby. It's not convenient for me to be going to the hospital for a sleep study, so I canceled it. Well, we kept our appointment for the feeding tube at Children's. We went in. They were going to do an NG tube down through her nose into her stomach. And when they went to do it, the left side of her nose, they couldn't get the feeding tube through it. It wouldn't go through. So they ended up putting it down the right side of her nose. We learned how to do all the feedings. We learned all the stuff. We come home, and that weekend was hell. She screamed when we fed her. She screamed when she went to the bathroom. It was horrible. And so we decided we were going to take her back to the hospital and try and figure out what was going on, if it was what we were feeding her, the formula we were feeding her, if it was something else. And we go to the hospital, and she was fine. The screaming stopped. We could feed her. She was fine. And we were like, well, what in the world? So we come back home, and we have, really great week. And one night, put her to bed, and I was exhausted. I went to bed myself. And we had someone staying with us. She was helping. I have these 3 children, an infant, very sick child. We had someone staying with us because she was helping us, and she and my husband were still up. And he yelled for me from the living room. He yelled for me. And it woke me up, and I went out to the living room, and she is laid out on the couch. And the girl staying with us is on the phone with 911, and she's not breathing. And I just picked her up, and I just started praying and saying, Father, I'm not ready to say goodbye. I'm not ready for you to take her. Just give us a little bit more time, please. What I didn't tell you was back in March, I had this thought come to me that she's not going to live, and you need to enjoy the time that you have with her. And so I had been doing that. I had been enjoying the time I had with her. I had been holding her. I had been, as much as I could, I was with her and enjoying her. So this happens, and they told us, the 911 operator told us, pull the engine out, lay her out. They tip her chin back. Can you get her mouth open? Could not get her mouth open. Is there a pulse? Yes, there's a very faint pulse. They thought she had a seizure. So 40 years later, the ambulance showed up at my house. Obviously, it wasn't that long, but it sure felt like it was that long. The ambulance came. They come in the house. The paramedics come in the house with all their gear. She has started to come back around at this point. She started to breathe. Her heart rate is picking up. She started to be more aware of what's going on. And she knows that these are medical people, and she's not interested in what they're going to do to her. So they transport us into our local hospital. They call our pediatrician. She says, I'm not even coming in. Transport them to Children's. So at midnight, we're being transported over to Children's Hospital in the back of an ambulance. And we get to the hospital. We get admitted. They look at her, and they told us that basically what happened was She was coughing, and because we had the NG tube in, she couldn't get her breath. And so her body shut down and restarted. Much like if your computer gets sluggish, you don't shut it off, you just restart, right? And that's what her body did. It just restarted. And we were like, okay, so it wasn't a seizure. No, this was not a seizure. This was just simply her body was overwhelmed, so it restarted itself. Okay, we were in the hospital again for another 6 weeks. And in that time, I actually called my parents. I'm originally from Ohio, and I called my parents and I said, we need you to come. We're in the hospital. She's on oxygen. She's getting breathing treatments. And I have no idea how long we have with her. So you need to come. And they were here in 72 hours. That's packing up their truck and driving. And it takes 36 hours to drive from Ohio to Washington straight through. They were here in 72 hours. They were here the entire month of July. And in that month, we were still getting those breathing treatments. We were still on oxygen. She was having all kinds of testing done. They were trying to figure out what was going on. So she'd have a test. They give her an antibiotic. I would argue with them about giving her the antibiotic, but she had to have it because she had a heart defect from the Turner syndrome. So she had to have the antibiotics as a prophylactic. And I finally told him, every time I give her an antibiotic, she has a flare. And then that flare calms down, and you want to do another test, and you have to give her another antibiotic, and she flares up again. And they began to see that I was actually right, and they agreed with me. But they still didn't want to blame any of this on the antibiotics. She ended up having a bone biopsy and a skin biopsy with a doctor from the University of Washington, and he diagnosed her with cicatricial mucous membrane pemphigoid. Cicatricial is scarring, mucous membranes is everything internal, and pemphigoid is a bulbous skin disease. So how they described it to us was her body attacked itself. So her body knew something foreign had come in, the antibiotics, but instead of going after the antibiotics, it attacked itself. And between our dermis and our epidermis, we have these little hooks that this is how the doctor described it. These little hooks that look like crochet hooks. If you crochet or you know anyone who does, you know what a crochet hook looks like. And these little hooks hold the dermis and the epidermis together. Well, her body attacked those little hooks. So the dermis and epidermis would separate, then it would slough off, and that's why we were getting the blood in the tears, the blood from the nose. That's what happened and why she quit eating. She had these sores in her mouth. That's why we had that hellish weekend in June. Probably that is what had happened internally in her stomach and her GI tract. And when we fed her, those open sores, it hurt. So she screamed when she had a bowel movement. It hurt. So she screamed. But the mucous membranes heal very quickly in the gut, in the GI tract. And so till she was looked at Children's, she was fine. Everything had healed up. When we got that diagnosis, and I said, well, to begin with, 18 years ago, I would be really interested to see the statistics now. But 18 years ago, her case went around the world. They were talking to people across the ocean. They were talking to doctors in Canada, trying to figure out what was going on with my little girl. She was the 13th case of a child. She was the youngest child at 2 years old. And only people 65 and over usually present with this CMMP. As a mother, I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. Who in our population is on the most drugs and antibiotics? People 65 and over. So again, this all goes back. to the antibiotics. There was a doctor that when they would come on rounds, he was a student doctor, and he started doing some massive research into CMMP and what could be done about it. And he came back one day and he said, I've been researching and I found this IVIG has been very effective with the older patients that present with CMMP. IVIG is intravenous immunoglobulins. So they take blood and they separate out the immunoglobulins in the blood, and then they put those into the patient via IV. Well, we, of course, wanted to try this treatment. It's extremely expensive at $10,000 or more per treatment. And they agreed to do one treatment, and we saw an improvement. But they refused to do any more treatments. Now, I'm going to give you a trigger warning here because this is what I experienced. My child, 1 minute, she would be perfectly fine. She'd be playing. She'd be happy. She'd be feeling good. The very next minute, she would be screaming in pain. She was getting morphine. They wanted her on steroids, and we had done steroids and said, absolutely not. She was a terror. She was so irritable. Nothing. It was horrible. And we said, no more steroids. But she was on morphine. She was getting morphine in her body, but she would still be shaking from the pain. She would be sweating from the pain, and she would be screaming from the pain while she's getting the morphine in her body. To see my child go through that was horrible, because there's nothing I can do as her mother. I can't take away her pain. I can't even comfort her because she's in so much pain that even while she's getting the morphine, the pain is above the morphine and what the morphine is doing. And there's nothing I can do to comfort her. So I've watched my child go through all of this. And they got with the infectious disease. I believe that's who it was. And they came up with a protocol for her that they presented to us. And this protocol was to knock out her immune system with steroids. She would have to be in isolation for a year. Everything that they were suggesting was in doctor speak off-label, which means it's not been approved for this use. So I ask, what are short-term side effects? We don't know. What are long-term side effects? We don't know. Now, may I remind you, I have a 5-year-old and a now 3-month-old baby.
Yeah.
And I have my child who I have watched go through so much pain, who I have watched just gradually get worse and worse, who I've already been prepared by my loving Heavenly Father that he's not going to live. And I just looked at these doctors and said, I'm not interested in what you're offering. At the time, we had 2 examples before us of families with special needs children. And one family, the family had came together and they were super close and they loved each other and they were able to take care of each other. The other family, the special needs, it had just splintered their family. Also, this is August now, I had sent my 5-year-old home with my parents to Ohio. And I didn't know how long she was going to be gone when she left. So my 5-year-old is 2,400, 2,500 miles away from me. She's not seeing her sister. She's not seeing her brother. She's not with her parents. And now you're wanting me to knock out my child's immune system for a year and have to be in isolation for a year. And you can't tell me what it's going to do to her short term, and you can't tell me what it's going to do to her long term. I am not interested. And I don't know how this is going to potentially affect my family. So we refused the treatment. And one of the doctors was adamant that we had to do the treatment. And we actually attended church with a doctor. And so we told her, you know what, would you feel better if you talked to this doctor that we attend church with? And she said, yeah, I would. And so we got her in touch with him and she talked to him. And after talking to him, she allowed us to be released from the hospital. We were released on August 20th. We came home. I told my mother, I said, we're going home. We need to bring my daughter home. And so that she can be with her sister, Sheridan, for as long as we have. We were home and we were told that we needed to get on hospice. And so we set up an appointment with hospice. And when the hospice nurse came out, she made a comment that we had not heard anything about. She said 70% of her airway is scarred closed. And we were like, what? No one's told us that. No one said anything to us about that. She goes, it's right here in her paperwork from the hospital. We're like, okay. No wonder we were told to get on hospice. So in those 2 weeks, he made a lot of memories for us. She never walked again. We were potty training when she got sick. She wanted to potty on the potty. She did get down and she walked around the couch. She never walked on her own again. She walked around the couch. She wanted to drive a car. She wanted to do all kinds of things. And she just left us with a lot of really precious memories. We did, well, I asked when hospice was there at our home, I said, if we're not signed up with hospice and she dies, what happens? Well, the fire department shows up, the state patrol shows up, the sheriff shows up, and the ambulance shows up. Because it's a suspected death. Oh. We got on hospice because you don't want all that showing up when you're already traumatized, and that's just going to be all the more trauma, and we didn't want any of that happening. So we got on hospice. She came and saw her once. I talked to her on Friday and told her how Sheldon was doing, and she said, well, it sounds like she's doing okay. I'm not going to come out and see her. We came home from the hospital with methadone. And we did not realize that from hospital to hospital, the dosage can vary. And I had been giving her double methadone that they had been giving her at Children's from our local hospital. And I didn't realize that. So she was sleeping a lot. She slept all day on Friday. She slept a lot on Saturday. And Saturday evening, we had plans with one of her good friends, and we went to their house for supper. And she ate for the first time in months. She actually ate real food, like a good amount of it, corn on the cob. And she hadn't been doing that. She'd just been, maybe a bite of yogurt or something like that, but nothing. She was getting fed via, we actually had a peg tube put in while we were in the hospital. So we were no longer dealing with the NG tube. And so we were feeding her through the peg tube. And I forgot to take her food with us when we went for supper. And so she ate corn on the cob. She ate a good amount of it. She played with her friend, and we came home that night, and I fed her when we put her to bed. And we often had an issue with her throwing up. If she had too much to eat, or for whatever reason, while she was sick, she would throw up a lot. Well, she threw up at 6:00 on Sunday morning. She threw up. And so I went in, and we were cleaning her up, cleaning up her bed, getting everything changed. And her breathing just sounded different. So I pulled out the stethoscope. Well, no, we gave her morphine for her breathing. They had told us they had given us a prescription for morphine, told us to, she's struggling to breathe, give her morphine, and if it doesn't ease within 10 minutes, give her some more. And we did that. And finally, I said, I'm just going to call the hospice nurse because this isn't changing. And she said, the hospice nurse said, okay, I'll come out and I'm going to listen and, do an assessment. And so she did. She came out and she did her assessment. But before she came, we got our stethoscope out and we listened to her ourselves. And we could hear the air just kind of gurgle through her lungs instead of flowing like it should. So we knew that we didn't have a lot of time. And she came out and she listened to her and we took her and we went for a walk and she told the hospice nurse, told my mother, she said, they have days, hours at the, they have hours, days at the most. And she came and talked to us and said, I'm going to go to the hospital. I'm going to get a prescription for lorazepam just to help ease her passing, calm any anxiety. And so she did. She did that. And we did give her some lorazepam. And we called our church family and said, this is where things are. This is how things are. And some of them came and spent the day with us. And at 6 o'clock that evening, well, at about, I don't know what time it was, I feel immensely blessed because I was able to breastfeed my son through this entire thing. That was not of my own strength. That was only strength from Father that I was able to do that. So I don't know what time it was. I went and fed him. And when I came back out, my husband's mother was holding her and her breathing had changed again. And so I took her from my then mother-in-law and I held her maybe 5-10 minutes, and every breath she would take, her head was on my shoulder, and every breath she would take, her head would come up, and she'd take a breath, and then it would go back down. And she just kept doing that until it was just further and further between breaths. And about 6 o'clock that night, she took her last breath, and I was holding her. And we called the hospice nurse and said, Sheridan took her last breath about 6 o'clock, and we don't know what needs to happen from here. She said, well, I'll call the funeral home and they'll come out and get her. And we said, and take her into the funeral home ourselves. And she said, yes. Well, she said, let me call the funeral director and we'll see. And she called back and she said, well, you can do that. Just take her in whenever you're ready. And so we had her at home for about 3 hours. Everybody was able to hold her, kiss her, love her. And we took her in. I don't believe we took the baby with us when we took her in, but I don't remember for sure. I do know I held her when we took her into the funeral home, and my oldest daughter was like, Mommy, you need to put Sheridan in her car seat. She needs to be in her car seat. And I was like, it's okay. She doesn't need to be in her car seat. So we had 2 weeks with her at home where we were able to make some very special memories. And the doctor that was reluctant to let us be discharged and come home, we met with her 2 weeks after Sheridan's death. And I just looked at her and I said, please tell me, if we had done what you wanted us to do, would it have made a difference? Or was she so damaged already that it would not have made a difference? And she said, seeing you today, I can see you've done the right thing. So I already knew I had done the right thing, but it was good to hear it from the doctor because she was so adamant that we do things her way. It was good to hear it from her that we had done the right thing. So I just want to give a little disclaimer. When I got the SJS diagnosis, I came home, I looked SJS up, and I wanted to throw up. So if you don't know what SJS is and you want to look it up, I'm just telling you, it's horrific. It is horrific. So you've been
What
warned.
did you call it?
Stevens-Johnson syndrome. And they will the experts Doctors will tell you it's rare um, that someone reacts to antibiotics, but in actuality, it's not rare. It happens all the time. They either don't know what it is, and so they give you more antibiotics, which makes it worse, or they don't want to admit what it is, and they don't know how to deal with it. So that's the story of Sheridan's life and death.
Wow. I was just looking up the Steven Johnson syndrome, and it's really like horrific because it says a rare, serious, and potentially fatal scale reaction that occurs when the immune system overreacts to its trigger. So I can imagine what she went through all this while. It was really traumatic. Like, as for a mom, you had to take it through your pregnancy to childbirth and all that. I feel so much. I cannot say I actually understand what you went through because I cannot understand what you went through, but I can feel the grief that when you went through all this season because you went through grief even within during the period and you went through grief after she was gone,
Yeah.
and you had to live with all of that all the season, and that's a lot for you to have gone through. That's a lot for you to have carried. So how did your faith and spirituality help and challenge you during the grief journey?
Mm. I honestly don't know how people go through life, just life, without the Lord. But I really don't understand how they can do it without Him when you've had something like this happen, when your child has died. Because our children are supposed to outlive us. We're supposed to die before our children die, right? That's just that's to our human minds, that's what makes sense. We get old, we die, our children live on. Um, I was very angry. I have had to forgive myself because I'm the one who chose to give her the antibiotics. So I've had to forgive myself. I have had to forgive the doctors because I was dismissed so many times. I wasn't listened to. And there's a lot that I left out of the story. Um, but one day I was actually, we lived back a half mile lane and I was leaving the home and going into town. And I was so angry with God. Why did my child have to die? Not that I wanted anyone else's child to die, God. Why did mine have to die? And I was so angry. And when I may have even been yelling at him. And when I finally got quiet, he came to me and he said, I understand your grief. I also watched my child die. And my anger dissipated, and I've never been angry with him about her death again. Because how can you be angry with him when his child died and his child died for me so that I could have life and I could have life abundant? I was no longer angry with him, and I haven't been angry with him since about her death. I've had to forgive. I've had to forgive myself. I've had to forgive things that my then husband did during that time because he was still actively addicted to pornography at that time and actively using while we were in the hospital with her. And I've had to forgive doctors and other people that didn't understand what I was going through, didn't understand what I was dealing with, and said things out of ignorance.
Hmm. Wow. Because really, like what you just said, resonates is what I tell people and what I have in my book most times, which is forgiveness.
Mhm.
Because one of those things that you need to learn is forgiveness. The only way you can navigate grief, like I was sharing the other day with Tony in his podcast, the model I use for my own grief theory is simple, very simple. It's acceptance, which has to do with the forgiveness part of it. Because if you don't forgive the situation, forgive yourself and forgive all that has happened, and even forgive. If sometimes we're angry with God, okay, forgive God. Ask all the questions you want to ask and let God respond. Then accept the situation, because by the time you accept that situation, the healing begins.
Mhm.
So the importance of acceptance as the first part of the grief process, the grief healing process, is key, because that will help you to take away all of the denials, all of other um, processes, and because you've accepted, when those things starts coming, you'll be able to tackle them as they come. And I really appreciate you sharing this particular part, because I don't know, for most of the audience watching right now, I don't know what stage you are right now in your grief process. One thing you need to understand is that you need to forgive yourself. You need to forgive the situation. You need to forgive everything that is associated with what has caused the grief. And accept the situation, because it has happened and there's no going back. There's nothing that can happen again. It has happened and it has happened. So you cannot turn it back. You can turn back the hand of time, but you can always do something different. And that takes me to the next question that I want to ask you, which is, how did you find purpose and meaning since your loss?
How have I found purpose and meaning since the death of Sheridan? Um, I didn't do so well with my grief when it came to my daughter's grief. So I actually, a friend introduced us to, uh, it just left me. But I did a 12-step program about grief, the grief recovery method, and it was amazing. It helped me deal with a lot of my grief. And I learned that we need to listen. I needed someone to listen and to hear me and not judge me and not tell me that it's been this amount of time, Beth. You just need to get over your daughter's death. It's been this amount of time, Beth. You just need to start doing fun things again. It's been this, whatever it was. Or, you know, people would come to her viewing line and said, well, at least you have other children, or you can have more children. That's not helpful. And
Mhm.
I learned that you have to forgive them in that moment because they want to help you, but they don't know how. They don't know what to say. So forgive. And it taught me to listen. So I have became a good listener. I can listen very well to someone else. And I I can do grief coaching. I don't market myself that way, but as someone who works with women who've been sexually betrayed, there's a lot of grief in that too. And so that's something that I can apply my grief, what I've learned from my grief with Sheridan's death, to that.
Mm. Wow, thank you so much, because that's another thing, that part that you just talked about. People not really knowing what to say when people are passing through grief, because sometimes there are just a lot. If you don't know what to say, don't say a word.
Mhm,
The best thing to do is just to be that woman or that man or that person that just be quiet
mhm.
and let the person talk.
Yeah,
Let the person air out his fears. Because at that point, what the person wants is just someone who listens,
right.
someone who can hear me, someone who understands what I'm going through. You may not really understand what the person is going through, but just giving that listening ear is key,
Mhm.
because that way you can, the person will be able to find succor in you and will be able to heal faster. Because sometimes I know a lot of people just miss it in, they have good intentions. They really care about you, but they don't know how to navigate it. They don't know how to talk about it. They don't know how to share. And because they don't know what to say and what to do, what happens? They just complicate more issues. And at the end of the day, you're no longer grieving what you took there. You're grieving what the person actually said.
Yeah.
And it is key. I like that part that you brought out. And like she said, she does a lot of grief coaching. So she can coach you if you're going through any sort of grief, whether from losses, because looking at all that she's been through, especially the grief that has to do with illnesses. I went through grief when my husband was ill and diagnosed with cancer without me knowing, and I did not know how to navigate it. So there are a lot of people also going through the same thing,
Mhm.
and they don't know how to navigate it. They don't even know they are grieving. I remember then I used to cry, get to the parking lot and cry and weep and cry my life out. And the journey from his hospital to the house is almost 45 minutes. I cry through the highway and I get to the house and I have to wipe my face so my kids don't know I've been crying. I have to smile so my husband feels, oh, she is happy. I have to play music everywhere, make everything look like everything is going on well. I had to manage everyone around me and make them feel like, oh, things are really going good. But deep within me, I was dying. And I remember there was a day he told me, you need to slow down. That was a week or so or two before he passed. And he said, because if you don't slow down, you will die before me. And I was like, no. He said, you're grieving. I didn't understand what he was saying. He said, you need to slow down. But when he passed, I understood what he was saying. Because the grief hit me so bad because I wasn't prepared for it. I didn't make up my mind. I didn't understand how to navigate it. So you need to understand how to navigate your grief in whatever stage that you are, or else it's going to be complicated and you will not be able to think straight. You won't be able to take proper decisions. You see yourself asking a lot of people questions, and those people most times you don't even know which is good and which is bad.
Mhm.
They just help you with whatever answer that suits they feel is necessary. But if you have a clear mind, you'll be able to take good decisions and you'll be able to know what to do at those points. It's very important. And that's why we need to go through these coaching classes. We need to go through, look for someone who will be able to help you in your grief. And has offered, Beth has offered that she is available. She can do all of that. And now we're talking about someone who has gone through medical tragedy. So please, in whatever way you know, you should, no one should grieve alone, no matter what. No one
No.
should grieve alone. So I will just take us through an interlude, and when we come back, we'll be looking at the three things that we learned from these and also the today's quotes, and we'll also know how you can reach Beth in this season. So you're welcome back. You're welcome back to today's show, and like we've been talking about how we can navigate grief in this season. And like I always say, grief is something we shouldn't do alone. We cannot go through it alone. So, Beth, how can they reach you?
You can reach me at coach@bethbrunk.com. That's my email. I have a website, bethbrunk.com, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram at Beth Brunk Coaching.
Yeah. So now we've heard from Beth, and we know that we can reach her anywhere on social media or on her website. So before we go today, I want to just give us a quote for the day, which is grieving a loss is due to medication is a heartbreak marked by unanswered questions and a call for safer tomorrow. So most times we just both we the caregivers, the doctors, and you the patient, be careful because when it happens, it has happened and it's gone and gone forever. So there's really nothing we can do about it. And our Bible verse for today is that as we continue in our journey, we should know that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in the spirit. So may these words offer solace to each and every one of us in this journey as we navigate grief and go through grief in a very healthy way. So now, how we're almost rounding up, and what have you learned from today's journey? Personally, I have learned a lot. It brought back a lot of memories and it brought back so much. And I can imagine because no mother should lose a child. I say it here most times. My mother in law couldn't stand the death of a child and she passed the same day. And I've heard a lot of stories about people who pass as a result of grief and loss of children. My father in law passed same way. And there are just so much. I know my mom was almost gone because of the grief from my husband's passing. So there is just so much. If you don't understand, you may not really know. If you've not been through there, you may not understand how it works. So don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on our social media platforms on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. Let us come together and move from being stuck to becoming unstuck. So today I just want to thank you for listening to us. But before we go, I want to hear from you. Share your personal stories of loss and how you found healing. And I also want to hear your experiences because your experiences can inspire and support others in our community. When God gave us this platform, He said we should share our stories so that others can be healed. And that's why we don't do a lot of interviewing. We make sure people share from their heart because it can be emotional. Some people have never shared these stories for life. And when they share these stories, it brings healing upon them and it brings healing to us too as we continue to hear these stories. So, how has it been the and what is the most challenging part of your grieving process, your loss, the loss of your loved one, the loss of that precious thing that your marriage, your jobs, or whatever that you feel that you've lost? Share with us on grief to grace now at gmail.com, or you check out our website, grief to grace international at grief to grace international org. So before we go, I want to remind us that we can help the grieving family. So you can scan the QR code I just sent out there, and that is a way you can help us and help the grieving family. A lot of people are grieving. When you're grieving, you can't think straight. You can't walk. You can't do a lot of stuff. You'll be in and out of jobs if you're not careful. You can't go to school. You can't concentrate on your family, especially when you have financial needs. So you end up grieving the loss of the person or the loss of whatever you're grieving, and you'll be grieving finances. So that's why I've been there, and that's why I talk more about it because I know what it's like when you're grieving too. You're grieving the loss of your loved one, and you're grieving the loss. of your finances, being not being stable financially, not knowing what to do, and all of that. So please help the grieving family. Adopt a grieving family today, and you'll be so glad you did. And also, um, don't forget to buy our book, A Pen That Writes Grief. Is a 60-day healing and devotional guide that can help you in this journey. It's so simple, it's just a textbook. So if you want it on e-copy, you can get that on our website. And if you want it on hard these copies already, then you can get that from our website or from Amazon. And if you want it autographed by me, then you can also purchase that on the website. And the website is grievetograceinternational.org. So I love y'all in so much. I love you in all that you do. So today I would just want to encourage you to continue to do all that you're doing for God. Continue to stay put, continue to move from grief to grace, continue to try your best. It's not easy to take that day at a time, one moment at a time. If I could do it, you can do it. I tell you. So, and you'll be able to move from your pain to your purpose. So, Beth, do you have one last word for our listeners today?
I have a tip, and it's more for those who are supporting someone who's grieving than it is for the person that's grieving. Um, Oftentimes, when we speak to someone that's grieving, we'll say, I understand what you're going through. But in actuality, you don't. You may have had a child die, but you're not me. So you don't understand what I'm going through. You can say something like, I can imagine how it would feel if it were me, or I know how it felt when my own child died. But please, please stop saying I understand what you're going through, because you don't. You're not that person. You're you, and you understand how you processed grief or would process grief, maybe did process grief, but you don't understand how that person does it because they're their own separate person.
Hmm, that's powerful. That's really powerful because that's true. So, Beth, I just want to say thank you for your courage, for your openness in sharing your story because it has touched us so deeply. And even this last one you just shared is key. Your journey reminds me and every one of us of the resilience of the human spirit and also the possibility of finding grace amidst our grief. And as we conclude today, I just want to say thank you so much, y'all, for joining us on today's platform. And you can check out our website or go to our social media platforms, YouTube, Facebook, and you'll be able to check out other episodes that we've had in the past. And don't forget to get our book because this is where we support this program. Through this book, I'm able to pay up most of the bills that we use in supporting this program. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I just want to say thank you so much, Beth, for joining us. Thank you, listeners, for joining us. Until we meet again next episode, I just want to say I love you. Remain blessed. Move from being stuck to being unstuck.